I'm Rachel. It is the evening of Sunday, September 9th, and Rosh Hashanah 5779 is starting. It's the Jewish New Year. Lots of time for renewal and reflection and serious high holidaying. And so in that vein, I'd like to wrap up my August reading and get you started on some September reading and hopefully not be too distracted by my neighbor who is always blasting her music, it seems, and hopefully not doing structural damage to the wall. So to start off with, I finished this book in really early September. This is The Patriots by Krasikov. It's on my Jewish fiction published in English in 2017 list, and this was a highlight for me, my favorite read of the month. It's this sprawling epic, which could make it, I guess, a little exhausting to read, but at the same time I was always very compelled to pick it up. And it is about this Jewish-American family that kind of goes back and forth from Russia and New York during the mid to late 20th century, very much during the period of the USSR. We have Florence, our main character, who grew up in Flatbush but decides that she finds capitalism to be pretty appalling and wants more rights for the workers and is chasing down that utopia and trying to find it in Soviet Russia. But alas, she doesn't really find it. She does get rather stuck there as time goes on. Ultimately, she and her family are able to immigrate back to the U.S., and another part of the story takes place in 2008 following her middle-aged son, Julian, who is going back and forth to Russia, also trying to get his own son out of Russia, who's trying to be a venture capitalist there, and he's also doing some shady big oil stuff. There's a lot going on in this novel, and I just found it to be fascinating and sad and compelling, and Florence in particular, I guess, her search for idealism and what she found instead and how it changed her, that really spoke to me the most. But there's certainly a lot of detailed history and more, you can read the snippets from my Goodreads review and snippets from all the books that I read in August in my, got distracted there, my August newsletter. My literary newsletter that I do every month, where I do snippets from the books I read, and I do a book meme and a book pick spotlight and more, so I'll link that down below. I also read this in August, or I technically started it in August at least. This is Your Life by Meg Wolitzer. It is the final adult Meg Wolitzer that I had left to read, and I sort of delayed putting my newsletter out there because I wanted to do a video where I talk about this book and the other two earliest books in her career that she wrote, and so I will link to that video below where I particularly gab on and on about this book. This is a book about Dottie Ingalls, who is an overweight comedian starting in the 60s and moving into the 70s when her career is kind of fading. Her daughters in the 60s are teenagers and they are young adults in the 70s, and I think they're the main characters, and we kind of go into what it's like to have a mother who isn't really necessarily around, and she's a single mother, and they don't have a lot of contact with their father, really any contact with their father, because he's kind of a jerk. And it goes into their issues of self-esteem and, well, I guess with Erica in particular, who is also overweight and is in this bad relationship. And then Opal is supposed to be really perfect, although in her young adulthood in particular, you can tell she really isn't. And she ends up working for a new comedy show that is sort of the new school of comedy that overtakes Dottie's comedy. But that being said, Dottie is a very central character, and I think Wolitzer does really well at probing both how obese women see themselves in a complex way, and then also how women use humor in a complex way. And so I really did enjoy this. It doesn't have the same tone as her other books, her best books, but I do really like it, and I talk about it a lot more, and also hidden pictures and sleepwalking in the video. This is my first read of September, bringing me into my sci-fi September reads. This is a Jewish alternative history novel, which I call the Granddaddy novel, the most famous of modern Jewish alternative history novels, The Yiddish Policeman's Union by Michael Chabon. I actually wrote a lot in one of my blogs about Chabon and some controversial comments he made earlier in the year, so I figure I owe it to him to try his work as well in fiction. But that being said, I'm having a difficult time getting into this. It's a mystery detective novel, and it's the main characters, your generic, scruffy, cynical, drinking guy who's having trouble with his wife and that sort of thing, and there's this, slow-moving plot about a dead guy, and the most interesting parts to me are the backstory about how Chabon imagines this Alaskan Yiddish paradise that bloomed out of the Holocaust. But it's just not catching my interest, possibly not entirely due to its own fault. I have a lot that I'm kind of taking my attention right now, but this isn't doing it for me, but I still want to give it a try, so... I did pick up the audiobook from the library, and I'm hoping this might be more my speed. I'll check back. Also, starting in early September, we started reading as a buddy read, Brewster's Millions by George McCutcheon. It's something that Steve Donahue roped about 12 of us into, and it's been an interesting experience. Granted, it's another thing that I've let fall to the wayside a little too much. I'm a little bit behind in our reading schedule, and a lot of other people want to go faster than I'm already going. It's a satirical novel written in the early 20th century about a man who inherits $1 million from his grandfather, but then inherits shortly after $7 million from an uncle who hated his grandfather, and a condition is that he has to spend that million before he can get the $7 million, but there's a whole lot of conditions around how he spends the money. And so it's kind of hilarious because Brewster is hoping to, lose the money that most people would want to hold on to. And it's been an interesting experience. This is my first Voxer read, and certainly my first huge buddy read where I'm interacting with other booktubers this way, a large variety of other booktubers. The conversation, I guess, has slowly petered off. I wonder if that has to do in part with our size and that we are, I guess, seemingly in different places of the reading, but hopefully we'll have more things to say in the next couple weeks as we finish up. I guess that's incentive for me to get back on track with the reading and leave a Voxer message. Some interesting things of note that we're talking about. We're talking a bit about the romance and whether or not that it's aged well, if it's still considered to be charming and cute, or if maybe as I and other people might believe it's a little less charming these days, and I guess it kind of gives the characters something else to do, because I think the conceit of trying to lose money just to lose money gets old pretty fast without characters, insofar as satirical characters are characters. But the real, I think, highlight of this novel is the cleverness of the plot about how he loses or gains money and how he responds to that. And there was particularly a scene where he was making buddy-buddy with a couple of guys who were trying to mug him. So that was pretty cute and funny, I thought. And so a lot of people are jumping onto the humor, but there are a couple of people who actually are a little anxious about the whole idea. I mean, because I guess in real life, if you want to actually try to lose $1 million, or its equivalent today, which is even more, given inflation, that's actually a pretty big number. So it's been kind of interesting conversation, and yeah, I'm hoping we can get back to it. And finally, to wrap up this video with a upcoming reading section, I have my next stab at the page 112 tag. The page 112 tag was started by Sean the Book Maniac after a French prize that uses this page 112 thing to create a short list so they only, for an award, and so they only read page 112 of the contendees and judge the book based on the merits of its writing alone, you know, out of context, obviously, with the rest of the story. And so a few people on BookTube have been doing the tag in various ways, and I've been doing it occasionally to try to pit books against each other that are on my TBR, that have been on it for a long time, and I figure it's time to read one and discard the other, because there's always a lot to read in the wings. So, as usual, my theme for the two books I'm reading from is intergenerational Jewish families. Also fits in well with the holiday, I suppose. So here we go. I'm going to start with this book. This is Safe in America, a novel by Marcie Hershman. Then he'd be there, standing on his own doorstep. For that split second, he'd let himself turn solitary again, let himself think about all he'd done in those hours with their straightforward demands for his mental and physical exertion. He could put that all behind him, and he could put his hand on the door of his own family's house and call out triumphantly, "I'm back! I'm home!" But at this moment in the school day, the victor's threshold at 206 East Trainer is still far off. Henkes had 25 minutes more of hypotenuse angles and proofs, and then hours more of English speech lunch, American history, and all the rest of it. Nor, in the junior high school, had the day's instructions been interrupted by announcements of the invasion for Teddy sitting in row 5, almost as scrawny at 14 as he had been at 12. Between him and his older brother, there was now too much that was different for him to even risk making comparisons. Teddy was furiously glad to have Henkes in high school and out of his sight for 9 hours, so he wouldn't have to keep measuring himself. Too often he still came up short. That would change in the future. He'd make a bet on it. But for now, he didn't want to think about anything besides this one moment here. It was better for him to be off on his own, to be off pure and separate, to be keeping away, apart, all himself and completely independent. That way, he didn't have to keep looking ahead or peering over his shoulder. Stuck, stuck, stuck. That's how Teddy felt when they were all home together, a family. Stuck between Joy and the baby and Henkes, the first son. He was just filler. Psst, Ted, what did you get for problem 4, or how about 5? Quickly, he glanced back down. On his test numbers, 4 and 5 were among those still left blank. You don't know? He whispered in clearly evident astonishment. Well, it seems like whoever he was talking to is supposed to be some math whiz, because Teddy's surprised he doesn't know the answer. And that's the only bit of dialogue in this page, and I like narrative as well as anyone, although I think it was a little difficult to follow at first, although that could be, you know, the context thing. But then it ironed out into understanding that Teddy is our main character, a junior high student who is sitting in math class, maybe wants to get home. Well, actually, I guess doesn't want to get home because he's thinking about his brother Henkes and how much he likes being away from Henkes, able to be his own guy, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, it's okay, but I think that the narrative part was a little hard to follow at the beginning, but, you know, intriguing story, I guess, Bildungsroman about a junior high kid. And the next novel I have is Golden Country by Jennifer Gilmore, so I will read 112. She heard her mother's voice, as if it had been this voice that had spoken, not her own, and she brought her hand to her mouth as if to put the sentence back. I promise it will be worth it, Vladimir told her, removing his coat and hat. Frances held her tongue and did not speak the litany of accusations she had been thinking of the entire evening. A mistress, already! Gambling! Oh my God, the mob has gotten to him! Had those also been her mother's thoughts? I don't believe you, she said tentatively. Okay, Vladimir said. Here it is. I am recreating the human eye. He traced his thumb over her eyelid as she held her head back languidly. Frances snapped her head up and looked at him sideways. Is that code for something? And does it involve a woman? No one but you, he said, stripping to his underwear and climbing into the bed next to her. There's a tube, a picture tube, and it imitates the condition under which the human eye functions. Vladimir put his large, dry hands on Frances's hip. It can visually record anything. Anything? Frances smiled, her head on her elbow. Anything, he said. You are my muse. He pulled her close. What, now you're a poet? Frances climbed on top of her husband and leaned back. "You little beast." He grabbed her hips with both hands and she rocked on top of him. Vladimir reached up to touch Frances's face, her neck, and her breasts. "I can see through you, my beast," he said, moving his hand across her chest and resting it over her heart. Once Vladimir had worked researching the X-ray, and Frances now imagined herself a set of stark white bones on black paper, two-dimensional. She crinkled when you shook her. Frances imagined herself discovered. "Here I am," she wanted to tell him, puffing out her chest as if this would give her a third dimension and get her husband to look closer. Not to her heart even, but to her soul. "If only I could bottle up this light that you are, put it in a box," he said. With a hand on each breast, Vladimir twisted Frances's nipples. The sensation shot through her, a straight and exacting line of pleasure from her chest to her crotch, everything now connected. "In every American home," he laughed, "a little box of you. We'd be rich." Seems like a good place to stop before this gets a little steamier. Seems like a private scene going on here, or at least we're getting into some sexy times. So this seems to be an interesting setup. I kind of feel like, I don't know, maybe Vladimir is staying out late and he's claiming that he's doing something scientific research about the eye, and Frances thinks he has a mistress. Obviously, I'm letting my mind run away with me here, but certainly the scene is very crisp. You're very much in the moment. We're not in somebody's head for a long extended period of time. And I really like the image of the black on white bones, two-dimensional, and being discovered. That's something really unique and also very visual. So I really think this one is working for me more than the other one, and maybe it is biased because I might prefer to read more about a wife named Frances than a teenage boy in junior high named Teddy, but that's what I'm going with. So that about covers it for me. It's been a really crazy weekend here in the DC area. We've had flash flood warnings and downpours of rain, and I've actually been out and about in it because I'm taking part in the library's banned book hunt around the city, which is really taking up a lot of my mental energy too, and I'll leave a link to that down below and hopefully be updating on that later in the month. But for now, I guess at least the nice news about all this torrential rain is that it's made the days cooler again, and hopefully that'll continue into the future even after the rain hopefully stops. I'll be out and about going to synagogue on Monday and Tuesday mornings, and I'll be singing on Tuesday mornings, so that'll be really fun. I love Rosh Hashanah. It's my favorite holiday. I love thinking about the idea of renewal and being able to assess your life and make up for past wrongs and think about what's going forth in the future and all of that. So Shana Tova to any Jews who are listening to this, and thanks so much to all of you who are watching. I'll see you next time.